So good afternoon to everyone who is already online here. And I would like to welcome you here on the second series or the second part of our online series talk, which is provided by the V4SDG. My name is Petra Pauerova and I will be tonight's moderator. And the topic of tonight's discussion, hopefully in very nice and friendly yet still professional way, will be the social impact of the COVID-19 as we have it still right now ongoing. And for the new ones who are here, I would like to welcome you even more. And for the brief introduction, we as V4SDG, we are the group of young professionals whose objective is to strengthen the cooperation within the V4 countries in the field of sustainability. And as for our projects, what we are doing, we have four main projects, which is V4SDG Compass, what is an advocacy initiative for the Visegrad Sustainable Minimum. Then we have V4SDG Exchange, what will be held through the Budapest Exchange, what will be the first strategic sustainability forum held this September 23rd and 24th. And then we have two platforms, which is V4SDG Connect and Lab. And those represent our online community for young professionals, which are free to join. So for the now, we have the second series going on. The first one is already online. So if you are interested in environmental topics, please check it out online. And then on 18th of June, there will be economy impact of the COVID-19, and 24th of June will be the final debate where you will be able to meet all of our speakers. And please, for the more information, feel free to use our website, what is www.v4sdg.com. And for now on, I would like to move for our tonight's guest. She is the head of the program of international dialogue in the think tank Das Progressive Zentrum in Germany. She also holds the master's degree in sociology, PhD in economics. She is the alumni of the program of Aspen Institute in Central Europe. And before everything, she also joined her working experience within the project office of UN Department of UN Development Program in Warsaw. So I would like to welcome Dr. Maria Skóra. Thank you for joining. Please unmute your microphone so we will be able to hear you. And now the stage is yours. And I would like to ask you to put us for the introduction, what do you think is important in this topic of social impact?
Well, first of all, thank you very much for inviting me tonight. I'm really excited to be here with you guys and in this context of Visegrad, which is very dear and close to my heart, but also sustainability, which should be dear and close to the hearts of everybody, not only in the Visegrad group. So yeah, I mean, COVID, what we face today definitely is an unprecedented situation. Unprecedented, at least in the last century and in our lifetime. I'm aware that there were pandemics and epidemics before, but what we face is definitely new for our generation, for our century, so to speak, and will probably the aftermaths of that situation will stay with us for a longer while, maybe even longer than the financial crisis that we only had a decade ago. So I think it is a very unique situation and a very event that we are observing. And so how I look at COVID, the outbreak of that terrible sickness at COVID-19, is that it's a threat multiplier. So it exposes the systemic and structural weaknesses of our economies, of our societies, of our governments. And as a result, it unleashes a sort of holy crisis, or a whole bunch, or a whole cluster, a whole bundle of crises. And well, of course, it's a health emergency, a threat to public health and healthcare as it is, to the infrastructure, to the staff employed there. That brings along the humanitarian emergency, because this pandemic has affected so many people, many communities at the same time, and needs immediate action now, needs aid now. So we can look at it also from a humanitarian perspective. That in turn takes us to the socio-economic aspect of it, and the fact that there are lockdowns, the fact that there are people who want to work but cannot work, or cannot work because they are actually affected by that infection, brings about economic slowdown, brings about shutting down, which in the end will result in recession, and which will result in aggravation of living conditions, of working conditions of many. And this, in some cases already now, but this will bring, or this can bring, has a potential of bringing a social and political crisis, the social unrest, the feeling of weakness, of threat. We already now see that some people are vulnerable to misinformation, to fake news. We see that some leaders are weak. So I would say the outbreak of COVID-19 is a pyramid of challenges. And it's not only about the economic resilience or environmental resilience, or the governance or the effective administration and reacting to that crisis, but it's also a test for our social solidarity, for integrity of the political leadership. And well, at the end, we will know if we can ensure that the living conditions, the quality of life afterwards, once it's all over, will not diminish, and for many, not only for the few.
Yes, definitely.
So yeah, I'm looking at COVID from that more holistic perspective, not only as a threat or as a emergency in terms of health, economics, but also a societal phenomenon, political phenomenon, and to bring that into a conclusion, what that means. I think we all have came to terms that this threat, this crisis, is too big to be tackled individually by individuals or by private sector, be it business or philanthropy. I think we all see that there is an urgent need for public action, for state action, for state actors, for a strong state to get involved, or even more actually, for trans-governmental action, for international cooperation and solidarity, because a crisis of that size cannot be contained and curbed otherwise. And well, we have to also make sure that the situation we're facing now, so the crisis we're going through, once the epidemic is still here, won't stay with us longer in the form of its aftermath. So it's important to talk about COVID now, but we have to have a long-term perspective and make sure that the aftermaths will be cushioned, and those repercussions will be cushioned as good as we can.
Yes, definitely. So for now, thank you for this fruitful introduction. It was full of points we will probably tackle in this discussion moreover. But for now, I would like to remind to our viewers and listeners, then there will be two parts of the main part. The first one will be 25 minutes of the moderated Q&A, and then there will be 20 minutes of Q&A from the audience. So please feel free to use the tool here on Zoom, which is called Q&A. Write down your questions and I will then later read them out for you if they will be not tackled there before. So feel free to ask any what you are interested in. And as for now, I would like to move for the main part, and why we are here and why this COVID situation is very important even for us as society, and it's important to look at from the social aspect. So I will start with more broader question, because probably we have to put there some base on which we will furthermore build over. And my first question will be, what effects does the pandemics have on growing inequalities? As we know, the inequalities, even though it's goal from the UN, and even though lots of governments are still trying to fight with it, we can still see it's growing. And it's not just because of the pandemics, but the pandemics kind of worked as a motor for it. So what do you think? What effects does the pandemic have on these growing inequalities?
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. It's not that this pandemic has caused the inequalities in the world, but it definitely has a potential to aggravate the situation and to petrify the existing inequalities. And if we are looking at it again from those few perspectives that I mentioned in my previous statement, from the perspective of health emergency, well, of course, the infections, um, they are more common. The morbidity or mortality is more common in certain um, groups of people than others. Well, the elderly, the people who are maybe poorer and have less access to healthcare, um, people who have other coexisting health problems are definitely more prone um, to suffer under COVID and to suffer from that disease, and also that brings, of course, other consequences. When it comes to socioeconomic inequalities, um, COVID, as it is, it's not only a health condition that affects us, but the fact that there is pandemic has already affected our economies. There are lockdowns, there is limitations of civil liberties, of economic activity, and we see that that affects not only professions but whole sectors of economy. So, of course, hospitality or services, entertainment. Um, these sectors are crucial in certain societies, and people employed in these sectors will, of course, very tangibly feel the consequences of that pandemic. And but on the other hand, if we look at individual professions, we also see that low quality jobs, precarious jobs, low paid jobs, they either disappear, or people working in such employment are maybe more prone to be exposed to that infection. So already here we see that inequalities in income, in access to safety net, in access to social transfers or social services will also be different from different types of people, depending on their socioeconomic activity or the types of jobs they're doing. Um, that's on micro level. On macro level, poor countries, countries that are less developed, governments with less economic firepower, they will, of course, be will tackle that challenge less effectively than rich countries. However, here, maybe if we look at the United States, which is one of the richest countries in the world, however, has this social infrastructure, access to healthcare on a relatively low level, we can also see how that can go astray. So how important the social infrastructure is, and equality in access or easy access to social to social infrastructure and healthcare infrastructure. But inequalities, if I just finish on that, inequalities we also see in our societies, and the situation of fear of a biological threat to our life has also caused some social groups being antagonized against another. So I don't know, locals against migrants, one professional groups seeing others being treated more or less fair in that situation. So in conclusion, I would say that yes, the pandemic, it aggravates inequalities, and depending on your individual features that you have, be it race, age, place of residence, gender, if you're really unlucky, all those features can actually multiply the inequalities or discrimination you're living. We're all affected by COVID, but we're not equally affected by COVID. And it is inequalities can, if not tackled, if action is not taken, these inequalities already that exist can deepen within societies and among societies. So yeah, that is a test not only for our economic resilience, but also for our social resilience and resilience as citizens and solidarity within our societies.
Well, for this point, you actually give me the point, because during my preparation, we were in email communication, and you wrote one statement, and there was written, European solidarity is the most effective way to tackle the corona crisis. And also you mentioned now, it's even if we mention it with America, we may see those big differences. But do you think this is also the test about how social mobility is working in Europe?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's difficult to think about the field of our life where COVID is not a test for. But yeah, sure. I mean, Schengen doesn't work anymore, right? We are locked in the countries of our residence right now, at least for the next 2 weeks, if I'm not mistaken. But at the same time, I do believe that since this crisis is too big to be tackled individually, and individual nation states are not able to tackle this pandemic individually, this virus has no passport and it knows no borders. So it's crucial that we have transnational, international cooperation, and that we support each other. And the European Union actually is a perfect platform for it, because it's not only a community of values, but it's also a community of interests and a community of joint budget that can be used for that to tackle this crisis, and exactly for that reason. And actually, maybe we don't see it enough, but a lot has been done already with ensuring access to PPE, so protective gear, with the common budget and flow of thought and academic exchange. We can boost research on treatments and vaccine, maybe even for COVID-19. Then we could be independent from China and the United States or any other countries that might parallelly work on that. It's also the budget that is foreseen to tackle the economic crisis and cushion that economic crisis. So save jobs and then rebuild the economies or sectors of economy that suffer the most under current circumstances. And last but not least, we also saw amazing signs of solidarity and manifestations of European solidarity when countries were sending doctors and equipment to Spain, to Italy. There is support. So of course, it's a crisis situation, and the EU in the past has already shown that not always deals with crisis, various crises, in the most effective way. And I'm thinking about the financial crisis or the influx of migrants and refugees a few years back, 4 or 5 years back, which was completely mismanaged. But maybe this time it could be better. And maybe this time this common interest and common platform and possibilities could be used.
Well, yes, definitely, hopefully. And as for now, as we will be speaking about European Union, we will stay here in Europe for now a bit. And my next question is more like a governmental one, because as we know, there is that worldwide policy that no one should be left behind. Is going down, it's downscaling from the UN to European level and to our national levels. So what can government do to transfer the social policies that no one would be left behind? Because me being from Slovakia and how Slovakia is trying to cope with the crisis, we've seen so many people who've been left out from the help, and they were always every week when there was something new, they always somehow found oh, we missed this group, and we missed this group. So how can governments transfer the social policies that surely no one would be left behind?
Yeah, that's a very good question, and not that I have a complex answer to it and a golden solution how to fix it. But I think government is a key word in this discussion. Governments are crucial actors today, not only to manage the crisis inside the country, but also outside the country, as I was just elaborating on the European Union and broader international cooperation. But I see a significant role for a strong state in that task of leaving no one behind. And by a strong state, I don't necessarily understand an omnipotent state, a a state that is present in every aspect of your life and every activity you're undertaking, but rather a state that is strong in governance, that has good, smart, innovative governance, and agile and smart system of redistribution, that it reacts quickly, acts quickly, and is resilient in times of crisis. And what I mean by that, that it has competences, so a competent manpower, so it has resources, so it has funds to function, and it has the trust of citizens. And here, going back to our pocket of Europe, so the Visegrad, Poland, Czechia, Slovakia, Hungary, and generally East Central Europe, my observation is that unfortunately we don't really have that in our countries. We have long seen the crisis and demolition or decomposition of the public sphere in general, either by saving money on public services, on public institutions, or be it by austerity or by outsourcing and privatizing many services. And of course, what is underfinanced and not attractive, it's not appealing to citizens. I can absolutely understand that people are very disappointed and annoyed by how the healthcare is working in their countries, or I don't know, other services like education. But it all boils down to the rudimentary question: how we build our public sphere and how we make it resilient and well managed. And this is also the issue of lack of public governance culture or care for public sphere. Unfortunately, in our country, we still have the plagues of public sector, like corruption, like mismanagement, like embezzlement, nepotism. I'm not saying it doesn't happen anywhere else in the world. Of course it does, but it doesn't help, right? It doesn't help. And of course, there are many public servants or people involved in public policies and implementing social policies and public policies who are driven by passion and devotion for that. But we still have a lot to do in building up a resilient and strong public sector and strong social public institutions and social services. And maybe if we looked at it as a common good, an investment and not expenditure, it would be far easier to leave no one behind, in the sense of having everybody involved and embraced, and not excluding everybody, and reacting and having answers and tools that are custom designed.
Well, sorry, I will just interrupt you here, because this will be probably also my next question.
Okay.
As you pointed very nicely out, like the corruption will probably not move anyone forward or something. But maybe to like put it in some bullet points, what or which are the key elements our governments have to change so the policy of no one left behind will be fulfilled?
You know what? Governments is of course a important actor, as I've mentioned, and investing more in the social in that public sphere would be really good, and modernizing it and making it more resilient, more innovative. But you know what? I would twist that question and ask what we as societies should do to leave no one behind, because at the end of the day, it's also about social cohesion and solidarity and a common bond. And it's a sort of a mindset that allows that to leave no one behind. It's maybe self-help and choosing a common interest and common good instead of a private interest. So if you're asked to wear a mask, please do wear a mask. Or if there is safety network and some aid programs for certain groups of professions or sectors in the economy, it would be good to be also solidaristic in an economic sense, because in this crisis, some other professions are particularly affected by the situation. Next time, perhaps it will be me. So I would look at it, that leaving no one behind. I'm not sure if there's any governmental policy that can that can kind of make this top-down decision that we should be thinking this way. I think there is also that's a big test or a big lesson for our citizenship, for active citizenship, for civility, for political leadership also, to ensure that this really happens and no one is left behind, or as few as possible are left behind.
I would like still be in the point when you mentioned the active citizenship, because that's something what, from my observation, I've seen is something we are kind of lacking of, or like the active citizenship, we may see some NGOs or some groups which are really, really into it, but then you see, for example, some Facebook discussions in comment section, and your active citizenship is already like down there in the bottom, and you are just like, I just don't want to like keep mind with this. So why do you think why this like the lack of will to be an active citizen is happening?
Well, yeah, well, being an active citizen always involves time and resources, and perhaps not everybody is able to donate that. I don't know, when you have kids or have to care for dependent members of your family, well, your active citizenship potential is, of course, lower because you have other obligations. Maybe not everybody has to be an active citizen. And sometimes we even have active citizens, but rather on a destructive side, getting involved in some fringe movements or extremist movements. Maybe it would be more important to have an empathic citizenship or solidaristic citizenship, or a feeling of being part of a community, of being more empathic and sympathetic towards other citizens. Maybe that would already be a small step on the way to have a more embracing society.
And maybe no one would be left behind in that
exactly.
that space. Yes, that was a really nice answer. So for now, I would like to also again remind to our viewers or listeners that they still can ask questions in the Q&A session as the number is growing. So we will move forward and we will go to V4 countries, as you also mentioned in our preparation that you kind of should know something about them. And my question is, like, we've seen different approaches. We've seen different approaches by every state, even though we are still similar, but we are still very different in so many topics, in so many approaches and so many different views, how we should be governed and how our government is working. Therefore, I would like to ask you to evaluate those approaches. How do you see them? Like, you may maybe point out what you found even from the, let's say, connection of sociology and economy in your degree, like what you found, what was working, and maybe what was not that right choice.
Sure. Well, it's easy to make such opinions and sitting at home and having zero responsibilities for what is actually going to happen with the country, with the citizens, and with the economy. But yeah, I'll take that privilege and I'll try to voice a few opinions. And so I'll start on a positive note that I think the quick reaction of all Visegrad countries was good. The quick reaction, recognizing the jeopardy, recognizing the risk pretty quickly, and not questioning it, not questioning the situation, not questioning the severity of the situation, resorting and falling back on science and what experts have to say, and not internet and the dark side of internet, which is maybe not so obvious. We see other political leaders in the world doing exactly the opposite. And I'm not only talking about Trump or Bolsonaro, but for example, Lukashenko in our close vicinity. These were political leaders that were questioning the danger brought about by COVID-19 and therefore putting citizens in unnecessary risks. So that's one point. That's good that did not happen in our environment. Secondly, from what I know, all governments not only recognized the situation but also started sketching plans and programs that would attempt to shield both citizens as well as economies, entrepreneurs, from the aftermaths and from the backlash caused by the pandemic, and perhaps not the pandemic itself, by the fact that there is a universal lockdown or the slowdown and shutdown of public activity, public life. So
Yes.
that, of course, we can debate if these measures taken or planned are effective, if they are well thought, how much political calculation is in it. But I would say yes, that proves that there is some strategic thinking and, in fact, some welfare character in those countries that have launched this. And from what I saw, it's also the exam passed by local leaders, by mayors, by cities, which were facing the citizens and on whose shoulders the burden of actually implementing all those measures taken to stop or slow down the pandemic, to flatten the curve, was laid. So I would say local authorities have really succeeded in also perhaps not only cushioning the consequences of this pandemic, but also calming people down, communicating in a transparent way, avoiding escalation of moods. As I said, the situation is not only bringing us fear, but also leaves us annoyed and fatigued. We've been sitting at home for 3 months. So
Yes,
this is good, but that doesn't mean that there were no things that didn't go wrong. And I would say that across the region we saw how the long-term neglect and underfinancing of healthcare can backfire. I think you guys all saw the appeals of doctors, nurses, and other medical staff. How bad and dire the situation was in hospitals, how they were unprepared, how they had to buy protective equipment on their own, how small the supplies were that were sent by central governments. So I think this, of course, is not the effect of the COVID itself, but shows more compound, more complex and long-term problem and process of decomposition or underfinancing of this public healthcare that we have, and that should be something that we really have to focus on, and maybe use this crisis as a new fresh start of thinking about healthcare and public healthcare in particular. And then another thing that I think some of the Visegrad countries failed the exam or failed that test in battlefield is the integrity of political leadership, is instrumentalizing this pandemic for political gains. And I'm thinking about Poland, for example, and where the presidential election was scheduled for May 10th, unfortunately midst of a pandemic, but the political calculation and the will to still carry that election despite the pandemic brought a lot of mess and a process of or pretty questionable legislative process to legitimize these elections, which in the end did not take place. In the end, they are postponed, but there definitely was more political interest and calculation in working with it than care and concern about public health. In Poland right now, there's also a scandal with the Minister of Health in a main role and his ski instructor. The scandal on regarding buying the protective gear, protective masks from China, which not only did not have certificates, but also were sold in 5 times as expensive as they were bought. So that's again mismanagement of public funds, and the lack of integrity in leadership. Hungarian government is another example, with introducing a state of emergency, or danger, as you want to call it, without the expiry date, which brought a lot of concern about to what extent is it curbing civil liberties, and to what extent is it's calculated for petrifying the power of the governing party. Yet there also is a law that limits freedom of expression. Many claim that it's not a law that is supposed to be curbing fake news. It's rather a law to bring silence to the critics of the government. So unfortunately, these examples show us that as much as on the technical, so to speak, operative level, the countries have managed the crisis good so far. It has not escalated like in Spain or in Italy, but there are still issues such as solidarity or integrity of political leadership that did not work that well.
Well, about the integrity of political leadership, I think there can be like 2 or 3 sessions, like how it works and how it should not be done. Maybe also not through Facebook. That's the advice from Slovakia coming. And I will slightly move to the next part, what is also about the Q&A from our audience. And the first question is really complex. Thank you so much for it. And it was also one of my last questions. So I will kind of like mix it together. And as we've seen, like those side reasons of COVID, as we're speaking about social mobility, or if we are speaking about economy and etc., we've seen that unsustainability was also the case, which caused this problem to grow even bigger. So what do you think, what you would advise us, let's say in this way, what we should learn from this? Like, if there is one step closer to living more sustainable life, what we should do for it?
Yeah, good question. One.
Not one, like if we want to move forward, like at least one step closer to be more sustainable in our lives, what we should do?
Well, paradoxically, and maybe that's a paradox of all crises, they bring pain and dramatic events along, but crisis is also a moment for a first start, a cathartical moment, a catharsis that could also be used as a chance. And we see that COVID-19 has an amazing impact on our environment, because we stopped traveling, mm-hmm. because we slowed down with the economies, because it seems that the degrowth paradigm in economy has never been as close and as tangible as now. Maybe we could think about that and look at the way how we consume, the way mm-hmm. How we can make our consumption more reasonable, stop over-consuming, stop over-producing. And of course, it's a statement coming from a privileged person in the Western Hemisphere, living in a country where everything is available. But since we are moving within the Visegrad in Europe, maybe that would be one lesson that we could learn, to take a step back and slow down and mm-hmm. not overdo what we used to overdo in our lives.
Definitely. I will again link one of your statements you already said here with the upcoming question from the big chunk we received. And you were speaking about that our countries were willingly to listen to the science. So we've been listening to scientists what we should do in covering this COVID crisis. But the question is, do you think they will be also that likely to listen about achieving the sustainability after the COVID crisis to the scientists?
I think no. Because okay, that's a very brutal answer, but
it's honest, so that's good.
But it's honest, and being realistic. I think the whole debate about sustainability has at least three backgrounds, and one is, of course, the imperative of protecting the environment for future generations, for protecting the environment even for us, because we are looking at climate change happening in front of our eyes. And that, of course, is a both moral and very practical imperative. But what stops us from following it is, of course, economy, and the economy that we are pursuing right now. Which is, it happens that technologies that are environmentally friendly are of course more expensive than these that are not. It happens to be the case that the production chains are also situated in various regions of the world, so they are affecting different societies differently. We have widening gaps between the North and the South, global North and global South, and we have them because they are profitable. So I ask myself, what should happen? Should Australia burn to the ground, or should all glaciers disappear, and we should be flooded with oceanic waters ocean waters to change that? But I'm afraid that the economic interest is in a deep conflict with the environmental interest, and there is a certain mindset that we have to overcome to change that. Otherwise, and I'm not yet sure if we're ready to do it now.
Yes, well, I will connect this mindset with another question, and it's the connection, as we know, economy and is based also on employment. So what is the future for current employment? Like we've seen, as you mentioned, green technologies are more expensive, yet there are more technology and less, let's say, workforce for people, actual like working by hand. So what is the future for employment?
It's a good question, because we don't really know it, and there is this disagreement if we should speak about the future of work or work of the future, because the future of work assumes that there will be no work for in the future. But yeah, so the work of future, I'll stay with this framing and wording. Technological progress has changed the way we live has many times. Yeah, back in the days 200 years ago, and it not only changes our individual lifestyles, but also as who we are as societies, and it changes the way how we live, who we identify with. It changes the structure of the societies, and with the technological digital revolution that we are facing now, and still green economies growing, I think we are facing yet another transformation. And in fact, some professions probably will die out, will disappear, but it's not that this void will be not filled in. There are new professions that are being born almost every day because of technological progress and the impact it has on the functioning of our economies, of it more and more often taking place on platforms, taking place in clouds, taking place digitally. Also the professions, if we are thinking about energy transitions, the professions that are directly connected with conventional energy sources like coal mine or atomic craft, or atomic power plants, probably in the future they will be less popular because new professions and new technologies will emerge in green sectors. So I don't think work will disappear. I think it will be a different work, different employment, more fragmented, perhaps involving more skills in research on that. How the world of labor is changing also shows that there is a growing polarization. So it's probable that in the world of labor, we will have professions that are pretty simple, that don't involve much skills, that are therefore also low paid, or that will be professions that are very highly specialized and involving high competences, which already bring you much higher at the ladder of social hierarchies. So what we can think of is, I think one thing for sure is that there will be new professions that don't exist yet. What's very probable is that there will be new structure of labor market and the structure of employment and structure of types of professions, and that the technological progress will still have a gigantic impact on us as workers, but also us as people, us as individuals, how we perceive each other and how we live.
Well, for sure. Maybe I will also, let's say, back up to this question again, but from the point of view of we four countries and from the Visegrad region. Again, I will use Slovakia, my country, as an example. We have some parts which are based just on the heavy industry, which is now dying out because it's not sufficient anymore. It's not green anymore. And yet, as the healthcare system is working as it's working, the area is not even that healthy to live there anymore. So what do you think, how Visegrad countries will cope with this transformation in this labor system, like to more green one?
That's a really good question, because well, green is one problem and innovation is even a bigger one. The Visegrad countries, they are of course very diverse, and they are four different economies with different interests, sometimes common interests, but sometimes competing interests. And they're also very tightly interwoven into a broader international, transnational production chains, like the automotive industry of Germany or the automotive industry of France. That maybe refers more to Romania. But I think the problem is that the strategy chosen, let's say 10 years ago, to be an element of a production chain of broader branches, bigger branches of industries, was a right one back then to attract foreign investors and to boost some energy into the labor markets and to have a boost of technological development in the countries. But at the same time, what we are lacking in that region is own innovation and own innovative industries and own capital to develop it. We have really very competent and highly skilled workforce, but very often it migrates, and we experience brain drain, in particular Poland and Hungary. We're losing manpower because of many reasons, be it social, political, but also economic. And unless that changes, I think there will be a problem of not lining up with economic leaders. I'm not saying Slovakia, Czechia, Hungary, or Poland will one day be like Germany or the United States or any other world superpower. Well, maybe they will, but maybe not in the nearest future. But definitely in the interest of these countries is to invest more in innovations. And innovations can be both green and not green, and perhaps green innovations would be the way to go. And here we know for a fact that the approach to energy transition, to green energies, to green economy is also differs from country to country. And Poland is a striking example of high dependency on coal and a very developed coal industry and coal extraction, which is being defended by this government, previous government, and there's a good reason for it, because this industry is people, is jobs, and as much as it maybe doesn't make much sense for the future, and maybe it's a dirty technology, but getting rid of this now would bring along structural mismatches and serious consequences for people who are involved in it. And these are thousands, when not hundreds of thousands. So I can understand that if we're talking about technologies and innovation, it's not only about ways of doing things, it's not only about technology, it's about what impact that these strategic decisions in which industries and how to invest will have on the society, on local communities, which sometimes are monocultures, like the communities that have for generations been living in as coal miners, and this is their identity, this is their way of life, this is the monoculture of that region, and killing that industry would kill the community. So yeah, there are many challenges on the way there, how to tackle that. So it's not an easy task at all.
Well, for sure. And for now, we will move for our final question from the audience. And it's, let's say, I like it because it's kind of like the wrap-up question. There's every bit of what we've been talking about. And as you speak about the society, and as we know, it's the crucial point. We, as a society, we have to act, we have to do something. So we will move forward. But there's also the thing that somehow we feel left behind by our governments, and that also our trust in democracy and democratic institutions are falling down. So what do you think, like, why people have that feeling they are left behind by the government?
That's I think we could think of, we could break that, crack that question into two: why they feel left behind and why are they left behind. Because some groups are really marginalized and some groups are really left behind in the sense, what does it mean really? Really in the sense that the access to let's say education, flats, healthcare is more difficult for them because they cannot afford it, because they lived in remote areas where the bus goes only once a day, and without a car it's difficult to get anywhere. So indeed there are people whose feeling of being left behind really corresponds with their life situation. But they also might be people feeling that they are left behind because that's their perception of the world, and that's also fine. We can all have, we live in a free societies, in a free world. We all are free to have our opinions. And at Das Progressive Zentrum, for 2 years ago, we did a study in France and in Germany, in the regions where right-wing populists were particularly popular. And what we figured out, why people were voting for them, for this anti-establishment narrative and rhetoric, was one thing was that they were really feeling that they don't have an equal share in the resources. Like really that there is only one bus, bus coming only once a day, and the next pharmacy is in the next village and I cannot get there. And they really felt left behind in the sense of not being taken care of, equipped, feeling forgotten. But some of them also felt that the politicians are so far away, busy with international stuff, international politics, and not focus on the citizens. And perhaps that's a lesson that politicians would have to learn, that direct contact with the voter, with a citizen, is really important if you take this responsibility to be a representative and represent people in politics. But then I'd say if we had more active citizenship, perhaps, if more people would go vote, because we have a really big problem with voter turnout in our countries. If more people were educated, if we had more civic education, if more people understood actually how our democratic institutions function, and that democracy works both ways. It's institution, it's the state, but it's also a proactive citizenship. It also takes an active citizen to have a democracy. Maybe we could change that. Maybe then they would feel less left behind if they could know how to engage in a public sphere, in politics, in building, in participating in democracy. So it's a two-way street, I would say, giving and taking, and taking and giving.
Well, thank you very much for these questions. I absolutely love the last answer. It's, as I remember my civic lessons, it was about everything else but not about civics.
Of course.
And yes, and it was driving me crazy. But for now, I would like to thank for everyone who was member of this talk, and once again, and who participate here and asked question. So thank you very much, Dr. Skóra, and
my pleasure.
Well, for everyone else, like, please do not forget that these talks are also continuing. So there is next one on 18th, and that's covering the topic of economies. So if you are interested in some topics, we even started today, so please turn out. And there will be also the final debate on 24th. So feel free to join it. It's, as you see, we try to be very friendly, but yet still very professional. So thank you very much for attending this talk, and hopefully we will see you soon on 18th.
Yeah.
So thank you very much again.
Thank you very much, and have a good evening.
You too. Bye.
Thanks.